Staff Sergeant Maya Reeves arrived at Camp Pendleton Supply Depot at 0545, 30 minutes before her official shift began. The California dawn was still gray, the marine layer thick enough that she could taste salt on her lips as she walked from the parking lot. Her left hand tremored slightly as she swiped her access card, a familiar sensation now, 18 months after the blast. The warehouse was her domain now. Rows of metal shelving stretched into the dimness, packed with everything from MREs to rifle parts, from medical supplies to communication equipment. It was organized chaos, and Maya had spent her first 3 months here imposing order on systems that had been neglected for years. She knew the location of every item, every requisition form, every quirk of the antiquated inventory software. It was nothing like Helmand Province, nothing like the operations she couldn't talk about, couldn't even acknowledge had happened, but it was hers. She powered up her computer terminal and began the morning routine, checking overnight requisitions, reviewing inventory discrepancies, updating the status of back-ordered items. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced efficiency, though occasionally she had to retype words when the tremor made her hit wrong keys. On bad days, this simple task could take twice as long. Today was a moderate day. The migraines had started around 0400, waking her from restless sleep. She'd taken her medication, done the breathing exercises the neurologist had taught her, and waited for the ice pick sensation behind her right eye to subside to a manageable throb. By 0530, she'd been functional enough to dress and drive. That counted as a victory. "Morning, Reeves." Corporal Danny Chen appeared in the doorway, coffee in each hand. He offered her one. "You're here early. Again. Can't sleep past 500 anyway," she said, accepting the cup. Might as well be productive. Chen had been working the supply depot for 2 years, a logistics specialist who'd never seen combat and didn't pretend otherwise. He was good at his job, respectful, and one of the few people at Camp Pendleton who treated Maya like a competent professional rather than damaged goods. "Got a heads up for you," Chen said, lowering his voice. "Sergeant Miller's been asking questions about you, specifically about your medical status and whether you're fit for duty." Maya's jaw tightened, but her expression remained neutral. "What kind of questions?" "Whether you've been making mistakes, missing deadlines, that sort of thing. I think he's building a case to get you transferred or discharged." "On what grounds?" "My performance reviews are excellent. He's not going after your performance directly. He's questioning whether someone with your condition should be in a position of responsibility at all." He used the words liability and safety concern. Maya set down her coffee carefully, using both hands to ensure the tremor didn't cause a spill. Safety concern, as if she were the one who couldn't be trusted, rather than a combat veteran with 8 years of service and a security clearance that Miller couldn't even comprehend. "Thanks for the warning," she said. "For what it's worth," Chen added, "everyone who actually works with you knows you're the most competent supply chief we've had in years. Miller's he's got issues with women in the military. That and people he perceives as weak. He's old school in the worst ways." Chen paused. "Be careful, Reeves. He's got pull with the battalion commander." After Chen left, Maya stood at the window overlooking the warehouse floor, watching the early morning light filter through the high windows. Miller's campaign didn't surprise her. She'd encountered his type before. Men who saw any deviation from their narrow definition of military excellence as a threat to the institution itself. Men who believed that visible weakness was worse than hidden corruption. What they didn't understand, what Miller would never understand, was that she'd already survived the worst day of her life. His petty harassment was background noise. The morning proceeded smoothly until 0930, when Sergeant Miller appeared with an entourage. He was a stocky man in his late 30s, with the thick neck and aggressive posture of someone who'd spent too many years as a drill instructor. Behind him were 2 junior Marines, Lance Corporal Torres and Private First Class Davidson, both new to the base and clearly eager to impress. "Staff Sergeant Reeves," Miller said, not bothering with any preamble. "I've got an urgent requisition that needs to be processed immediately." Maya accepted the form and scanned it quickly. It was a request for training ammunition and targets for a company-level exercise scheduled for next month. Hardly urgent by any definition. "This is for an event 3 weeks out," she said. "Standard processing time is 48 hours for non-priority requests. I'll have it ready by Friday." "I said it's urgent," Miller repeated, his voice hardening. "When a sergeant tells you something is urgent, Staff Sergeant, that should be good enough." Maya met his eyes calmly. "The urgent designation is for operational requirements, medical emergencies, or mission-critical equipment failures. This requisition doesn't meet any of those criteria. 48 hours. You questioning my judgment? I'm following established protocol, Sergeant. If you believe this qualifies as urgent, you'll need to provide written justification from your commanding officer." She kept her voice level, professional, giving him nothing to latch onto. Miller leaned against the counter, his expression shifting to something approximating sympathy, but his eyes remained cold. "Look, I get it. You're trying to prove you can still do the job, even with your situation, but maybe you're being a little little too rigid, trying to compensate. A good Marine knows when to be flexible. The implication was clear. Her adherence to regulations was somehow a symptom of her injury rather than professional competence. Torres and Davidson watched the exchange with interest, absorbing every word. This was the real purpose of Miller's visit, Maya realized, not to get his requisition expedited, but to establish a narrative in front of witnesses. The difficult supply clerk who couldn't adapt, who hid behind regulations because she lacked the capability for real decision-making. 48 hours, Maya repeated. If there's nothing else, Sergeant, I have inventory to complete. Miller straightened, shaking his head with exaggerated disappointment. You know, Reeves, I've been hearing stories about your time overseas. Some people say you were quite the operator back in the day, but I also heard you had some kind of episode. Panic attack during a firefight, froze up, had to be medevaced out. That true? The tremor in Maya's left hand increased slightly, not from fear or anger, but from the spike in heart rate that her damaged nervous system couldn't fully regulate. She'd learned to recognize the physiological responses, to separate them from emotion. The TBI had made her body more reactive, but her mind remained clear. My medical history is not a topic for casual discussion, Sergeant. Just trying to understand who I'm working with, Miller said. Because here's the thing. In my experience, Marines who couldn't handle combat don't suddenly become great at garrison work. They're just broken, and broken tools don't belong in a properly functioning unit. Torres shifted uncomfortably. Even Davidson, young and inexperienced, seemed to recognize that Miller had crossed a line. Maya's voice remained steady. Is there anything else related to your requisition that you need clarified, Sergeant Miller? No, I think I understand perfectly. He tapped the counter twice, a gesture of dismissal. 48 hours. Try not to let your condition slow down the process. He left with his escorts, their boots echoing on the concrete floor. Maya waited until they were out of sight, then allowed herself 3 deep breaths, a technique from her therapy sessions. In for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 4, regulate the nervous system, return to baseline. Chen emerged from behind a shelf stack. You okay? Fine. He's an asshole. He's a sergeant doing what sergeants do, testing boundaries. Maya returned to her computer terminal. He'll get bored eventually, but she knew that wasn't true. Miller wouldn't get bored. Men like him never did, because they fed on the power dynamic, the ability to make someone uncomfortable and watch them squirm. What Maya hadn't shown him, what she'd carefully concealed, was that she wasn't uncomfortable. She was calculating. Over the next week, Miller's visits became a pattern. He appeared every other day, always with junior Marines in tow, always with some pretext about requisitions or supply chain questions, and always with commentary. On Tuesday, he questioned whether Maya had properly secured classified equipment, suggesting that her mental condition might make her a security risk. She responded by walking him through the security protocols she'd personally redesigned, which exceeded regulation standards. On Thursday, he asked whether the tremor in her hand might cause her to make inventory errors. She showed him the digitized tracking system she'd implemented, which had reduced discrepancies by 73% since her arrival. On Saturday, he brought up her running routine. He'd apparently seen her on the track at dawn. You run kind of funny, Reeves, like you're off balance. That from the head injury? Must be hard, being unable to do things you used to do. Maya had simply replied that she'd run her 3 miles that morning in 22 minutes, which remained well above the Marine Corps standard for her age group, despite the balance issues that sometimes made her veer slightly to the left. Each encounter followed the same structure. Miller would probe for weakness, make a subtle or not so subtle reference to her perceived inadequacy, and then leave with his audience of junior Marines who were being taught that this was acceptable leadership behavior. What Miller didn't see, what he couldn't see, was how Maya processed each interaction with clinical detachment. She documented every encounter, noting dates, times, witnesses, and specific language used. She wasn't building a complaint file. She simply recognized that men like Miller rarely stopped at verbal harassment. Eventually, they escalated, and when they did, she wanted to be prepared. At 1700 each evening, after the supply depot officially closed, Maya had the warehouse to herself. This was when she did her real work, the training she couldn't let anyone see. She'd requisitioned a disassembled M4 carbine under the guise of training materials for a supply inventory course. In reality, she used it for her own purposes. Each evening, she would blindfold herself and disassemble the weapon completely, then reassemble it by touch alone. Week 1 after the TBI, it had taken her 40 minutes and multiple mistakes. Week 20, she'd managed it in 8 minutes. Now, 18 months out, her time was down to 2 minutes 47 seconds. The tremor in her left hand made certain manipulations difficult. Anything requiring fine motor control on that side took longer. But she'd adapted, using her right hand for precise movements and her left for support and larger actions. The Marine Corps had taught her to be ambidextrous for exactly this reason. Tonight, she was working on something more advanced, stripping and cleaning the weapon while solving tactical problems in her head. A standard standard counterinsurgency scenario. Hostile building, unknown number of combatants, civilian presence likely. She worked through the problem as her hands moved over the weapon's components. Primary approach vector, south entrance, lowest visibility from street level. Secondary extract route through alley system. Communications protocol, hand signals until contact, then tactical brevity codes. Rules of engagement, positive identification required. Civilians take priority for protection. Her hands never stopped moving. Bolt carrier group disassembled, cleaned, reassembled. Upper and lower receivers separated and inspected. Magazine well checked for obstructions. This was the Maya that Miller would never see. The one whose TBI had affected her motor coordination and given her debilitating migraines, but hadn't touched the tactical processing capability that had made her valuable to Naval Special Warfare Development Group. The one who could still run 8 different combat scenarios simultaneously while maintaining awareness of her environment, even if she occasionally forgot where she'd parked her car. The brain was strange that way. The blast had damaged specific neural pathways, the ones controlling fine motor coordination, balance, and some aspects of short-term spatial memory. But the pathways she'd reinforced through thousands of hours of tactical training, the ones that processed threat assessment and mission planning, remained largely intact. Different parts of the brain, different networks, different vulnerabilities. She finished the reassembly, removed the blindfold, and field stripped the weapon again for a visual inspection. Perfect, no errors. Maya allowed herself a small smile. Let Miller think she was broken. Let him underestimate her. She'd learned in actual combat that the enemy you underestimated was the one who killed you. That night, Maya sat in her small apartment off base, staring at a dinner she couldn't remember preparing. The chicken was overcooked, the vegetables cold. She'd apparently started cooking, got distracted by something, and lost 30 minutes somewhere. This was the part of TBI that the medical reports couldn't fully capture. The time slips, the moments where her brain just skipped. She'd be doing something routine, and suddenly she'd realize she had no memory of the last 20 minutes. Nothing traumatic, nothing dangerous, just gone. Her phone showed 3 missed calls from her sister in Ohio. Maya stared at the notification, trying to calculate time zones, trying to remember if there was a reason Angela would be calling. Birthday? No, that was August. Holiday? No, it was mid-March. Just checking in? Probably. She couldn't call back tonight. The migraines had returned around 1800, and by now they'd progressed to the point where light and sound felt like physical assaults. She'd taken her medication, but it would be another hour before it fully kicked in. Instead, she lay on her couch in the dark, focusing on breathing. This was the reality of TBI that the military medical system struggled to categorize. She could still perform at an elite level in specific, structured contexts. She could process tactical information, maintain security protocols, manage complex inventory systems, but she couldn't reliably remember to eat dinner or return phone calls. She could disassemble a weapon blindfolded, but sometimes couldn't find her way out of a parking garage she'd been to a dozen times. The doctors called it islands of functionality. Her brain had created workarounds, alternate neural pathways that allowed her to maintain certain capabilities while others remained compromised. It was why the initial medical evaluation had been so confusing. She'd failed some basic cognitive tests while excelling at complex ones. The military's response had been to classify her as unfit for combat duty and reassign her to garrison work. It was a blunt instrument approach. If you're damaged, you're out. No consideration for what remained, what could still be utilized, what value she might still offer. Maya understood the reasoning. The military needed to be able to rely on its personnel, especially in combat situations. A Marine who might lose 30 minutes of memory during a mission was a liability to themselves and their unit. The decision to reassign her had been logical, even compassionate, but it was also wasteful, because while Maya couldn't be trusted in unpredictable combat environments anymore, she had knowledge and skills that could benefit others. She could teach, she could mentor, she could help design better training protocols, she could contribute to the mission in different ways. The system just didn't have a category for that. You were either combat ready or you weren't. Binary. Simple. Wrong. Her phone buzzed. A text from Chen. Miller's been asking other units about you, trying to find someone who'll say you messed up. Thought you should know. Maya typed back with her right hand, her left still tremoring too much for accurate typing. Thanks. Not worried. That wasn't entirely true. She wasn't worried about Miller finding legitimate complaints. There weren't any, but she was worried about what he might manufacture if he couldn't find real ammunition. Men like Miller didn't give up when they encountered resistance. They escalated. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep, knowing it wouldn't come easily. The TBI had disrupted her sleep cycles, giving her broken nights of 3 or 4 hours punctuated by periods of sudden, complete wakefulness. Tonight would be no different, but at 0500, like always, she'd be awake, and at 0545, like always, she'd be at the supply depot, because whatever else the blast had taken from her, it hadn't taken her discipline. 2 weeks after the first first confrontation, Miller changed tactics. He stopped coming to the supply depot himself and instead began sending junior Marines with increasingly complicated or poorly documented requisitions, forcing Maya to spend extra time correcting errors or requesting additional information. It was a transparent strategy: create administrative friction, then blame Maya for the delays. She countered by documenting every interaction in meticulous detail, including time-stamped emails and written summaries of verbal requests. When a captain from Miller's unit complained about slow processing times, Maya was able to provide a complete record showing that 94% of delays were due to incomplete requisition forms from Miller's Marines. The captain, to his credit, took the information back to Miller. The harassment stopped for exactly 3 days. On the 4th day, Miller appeared with a new approach. "Staff Sergeant Reeves," he said, his tone almost friendly, "I want to apologize for any misunderstandings we've had. I think we got off on the wrong foot." Maya regarded him carefully. Men like Miller didn't apologize unless they had an angle. "I appreciate that, Sergeant. The thing is," Miller continued, "I've been talking to some people, and I'm concerned that maybe we're not utilizing your skills effectively. You've got a lot of experience, and here you are sorting supplies. Seems like a waste." This was new. Maya waited. "I've been thinking, maybe you should come out to the range sometime. Help with training. Share some of that operator knowledge you've got. What do you say?" It was a trap, obviously. Miller wanted to see her perform in a high-pressure environment, wanted to witness firsthand any limitations from her TBI, wanted to create a situation where she might fail publicly. "What kind of training did you have in mind?" Maya asked. "Basic rifle qualification. You could run some of the lanes, give feedback to junior Marines. Let them learn from someone who's actually been downrange. I'm assigned to supply operations, Sergeant. Training isn't my billet. Come on, Reeves, unless you're not comfortable on the range anymore. I heard head injuries can mess with your depth perception, balance, that sort of thing. No shame in admitting you're not up for it." There it was, the challenge wrapped in false sympathy. Say no, and Miller would spread the word that she'd refused because she couldn't handle it. Say yes, and he'd have the opportunity to watch her fail. Except Maya didn't fail at marksmanship. The TBI had affected her motor control in some ways, but she'd spent months adapting her shooting stance to compensate. She'd qualified expert on her last range visit, scoring 243 out of 250 possible points. "I'd need authorization from my CO, Maya said. "Already got it." Miller produced a printed email. "Captain Rodriguez approved you for 1 day of temporary duty with my unit next Wednesday. Range day. Should be fun." Maya scanned the email. It was legitimate. Miller had somehow convinced her commanding officer that this was a professional development opportunity. "I'll be there," she said. "Outstanding. 0700, range 114. Bring your A-game, Staff Sergeant." After he left, Chen appeared from the back office. "That's not good." "No," Maya agreed. "It's not. You don't have to go. You could tell Captain Rodriguez you're needed here and confirm Miller's narrative that I'm hiding from real Marine work." "No, I'll go." "Can you still shoot?" Maya smiled slightly. "Better than Miller, I'd bet. But that's not the point. He's trying to create a situation where I'm visibly struggling, where junior Marines see me as incompetent. The actual shooting is secondary. So what are you going to do? Shoot well, stay calm, give him nothing." Maya returned to her inventory work and document everything. Chapter 7. The range. Wednesday morning arrived with the kind of clear, cold dawn that made range work tolerable. Maya arrived at range 114 at 0645, her personal rifle case in hand. She'd debated whether to bring her own weapon or use a issued M4, finally deciding that using her own, a rifle she'd customized and knew intimately, was the better choice. The range was already busy. Marines from Miller's company were setting up target stands, organizing ammunition, running through pre-firing safety briefs. Miller stood near the range tower, talking to a gunnery sergeant Maya didn't recognize. She approached and rendered a salute. "Staff Sergeant Reeves reporting as ordered." Miller returned the salute with exaggerated precision. "Right on time. Gunny, this is Staff Sergeant Reeves. She's going to help us run qual lanes today." The gunnery sergeant, his name tape read Harrison, looked Maya over with the assessing gaze of someone who'd spent decades evaluating Marines. "You're the supply chief everyone's been talking about." "Yes, Gunny." "Miller here says you've got some special operations experience. That true?" Maya chose her words carefully. "I've worked in specialized billets, Gunny. Nothing I can discuss in detail. But you can shoot?" "Yes, Gunny." "Good. We're running basic qual lanes first, then some tactical scenarios for the Marines who want to push themselves. Miller thought you might help demonstrate proper technique, maybe share some tips from your operational experience. So that was the setup. Put her in an instructor role, then watch for any signs of weakness or hesitation. If she struggled with the physical demands of running multiple lanes, if her balance issues caused problems, if she had one of her cognitive slips, any of it could be used as evidence that she wasn't fit for duty. Happy to help, Gunny." The morning proceeded smoothly. Maya ran 3 qual lanes, observing Marines as they fired, offering corrections on stance, breathing, trigger control. Her own qualification run came at 1,000. During during a break when most of the company was watching. Miller made sure of it, calling everyone over. Staff Sergeant Reeves is going to show us how it's done. Pay attention. This is someone who's actually been in combat. Maya took her position on the 200-yard line. Chamber empty, magazine out. The range safety NCO verified her weapon was clear, then gave the command. Lock and load 1 magazine, 30 rounds. You will have 3 minutes to engage all targets. You may fire when ready. She loaded, charged the weapon, and settled into her modified stance. The balance issues from her TBI meant she couldn't use the traditional isosceles or weaver stances effectively. Both required equal weight distribution that her damaged vestibular system couldn't maintain consistently. Instead, she developed a modified position that kept more weight on her right side, using her left leg primarily for stability rather than balance. It looked unusual, but it worked. The targets popped up in sequence: close range, medium range, long range, then random intervals. Maya's breathing fell into rhythm. Inhale, exhale, press. The rifle reported, target dropped. Next target. Adjust, breathe, press. Her left hand tremored where it gripped the handguard, but she'd learned to work with it rather than fight it. The tremor was rhythmic, predictable. She timed her shots between the oscillations, finding the moments of stillness. 30 rounds, 42 targets engaged. When the lane went cold and the safety NCO called her clear, Maya stepped back and safed the weapon. Targets! The range tower called out. The spotters checked her target. 247 out of 250. All center mass or headshots. A respectable score. Actually better than respectable. It was the second highest score of the day. Miller had shot 239. Gunny Harrison nodded approvingly. Outstanding shooting, Staff Sergeant. That stance is unorthodox, but I can't argue with results. Adapted for some old injuries, Gunny. Lost some balance function. Had to compensate. Well, it works. Miller, you watching? This is what fundamentals look like. Miller's jaw was tight. Yes, Gunny. Very impressive. The rest of the day continued in the same vein. Maya demonstrated tactical reloads, malfunction clearances, shooting from improvised positions. Her TBI didn't affect any of it. These were skills so deeply ingrained that they ran on muscle memory and procedural networks that had survived the blast intact. What Miller had intended as an exposure of weakness became a demonstration of capability. By the end of the day, several junior Marines were asking Maya for additional tips, wanting to know where she'd learned to shoot like that. Just practice, she told them. Thousands of hours of practice. The retaliation came 3 days later. Maya was processing a standard requisition when her desk phone rang. Captain Rodriguez, her commanding officer. Reeves, I need you in my office. Now. His tone was wrong, clipped, formal, angry. Maya's tactical mind immediately began running scenarios. What had happened? What had she missed? She walked to the battalion headquarters building, trying to inventory any recent actions that might have triggered a command summons. Nothing came to mind. Her work had been flawless, her conduct professional, her medical appointments all attended. Captain Rodriguez's office was small and cluttered with paperwork. He was a thin man in his early 40s, a career logistics officer who'd always treated Maya fairly. Today his expression was cold. Sit down, Staff Sergeant. She sat. I received a formal complaint about you this morning from Sergeant Miller. Maya's stomach tightened, but her face remained neutral. What's the nature of the complaint, sir? He alleges that you've been improperly accessing classified information systems, that you've been sharing operational details with junior Marines, and that you've been misrepresenting your security clearance level. Rodriguez slid a document across the desk. He's provided written statements from 2 witnesses. Maya scanned the document quickly. Torres and Davidson, the 2 junior Marines Miller always brought with him. The allegations were vague but serious. Staff Sergeant Reeves mentioned classified operations in Afghanistan. She accessed computer systems that appeared to be above her clearance level. She implied she had knowledge of special operations that junior Marines shouldn't be exposed to. It was all technically true, but completely out of context. Yes, she'd mentioned Afghanistan in the context of explaining why she had a TBI. Yes, she'd accessed classified systems because her supply billet required her to track certain controlled items. Yes, she had knowledge of special operations because she'd actually been part of them, though she'd never discussed specific details. Miller had taken legitimate facts and twisted them into something that sounded like a security violation. Sir, Maya said carefully, these allegations are based on misunderstandings. My security clearance is current and appropriate for my billet. I can provide documentation. I've already reviewed your clearance file, Rodriguez interrupted. It shows a secret clearance, which is standard for supply operations. What it doesn't show is any authorization for special operations knowledge or access to TSCI materials. Sir, I can't discuss my previous billets in detail without proper authorization, but my clearance history will show. Your clearance history shows a standard progression for a logistics specialist. Nothing unusual. Nothing that supports the kind of operational knowledge Miller claims you've been implying. Maya felt the trap closing. Her actual clearance level, the compartmentalized access she'd had during her DEVGRU attachment, wouldn't appear in standard personnel files. It was buried in classified annexes that required specific authorization to access, and she couldn't reveal those details to defend herself without violating the same security protocols she was being accused of breaking. Sir, I request that you contact BUPER's Special Operations Division and request a complete security review of my file. There are elements of my service record that are appropriately classified. Rodriguez studied her for a long moment. That's a very specific request, Staff Sergeant. Why would a supply clerk need me to contact Special Operations personnel? Because my previous assignment involved specialized work that I cannot discuss without proper authorization, sir. The full details of my clearance and service record will clarify any questions about my access and knowledge. Or, Rodriguez said slowly, you're manufacturing an excuse because you've been caught embellishing your record. Sir, I have never embellished. Dismissed, Staff Sergeant. I'm going to investigate this complaint thoroughly. Until the investigation is complete, you're restricted to your current duties. No range time, no interaction with Marines outside your immediate work section, no discussion of any operational topics. Understood? Yes, sir. Maya stood and saluted, her mind racing. Miller had found his angle. He couldn't attack her competence, so he'd attacked her credibility, and the very classification system designed to protect operational security was now being used as a weapon against her. She returned to the supply depot and immediately began drafting a written response to the allegations. Every claim needed to be addressed carefully, precisely, without revealing classified information, but clearly establishing her innocence. It took her 4 hours to write 3 pages. Every sentence had to be vetted against security protocols, every detail checked to ensure she wasn't inadvertently revealing protected information. Chen found her at her desk at 1900, long after the depot had officially closed. You okay? Miller filed a security complaint, claims I've been misrepresenting my clearance and sharing classified information. That's bullshit. I've worked with you for 6 months. You never talk about classified stuff. I know, but he's got 2 junior Marines who'll testify that I implied I had special operations knowledge. Do you? Maya looked at Chen for a long moment. I can't answer that question. That's answer enough. Chen sat down across from her. What are you going to do? Request a full security review. Force them to look at my complete file, including the compartmentalized sections. But that takes time, and Miller knows it. In the meantime, I'm restricted, under investigation, with my credibility questioned. This is character assassination. This is what happens when you're inconvenient, Maya said quietly. The system would rather push me out than deal with the complexity of who I actually am. Miller's just exploiting that. She finished her written response and submitted it through official channels. Then she did what she'd been trained to do. She documented everything, secured her files, and prepared for the long fight. Because Maya Reeves had survived an IED blast, a TBI, and 18 months of rehabilitation, she'd be damned if she'd be taken down by paperwork and petty harassment. The next 2 weeks were professionally agonizing. Maya continued her supply duties, but the cloud of investigation hung over every interaction. Junior Marines who'd previously been friendly became distant, unsure whether associating with someone under investigation was career-wise. Even Chen's support became more cautious, more circumspect. Rodriguez conducted interviews with anyone who'd worked with Maya. He reviewed her computer access logs, her requisition records, her communications. He interviewed Miller's witnesses multiple times. Maya, for her part, maintained perfect conduct. She arrived early, left late, and ensured her work was beyond reproach. She also quietly contacted the BUPER's Special Operations Division herself, requesting that they flag her file for Rodriguez's investigation. The response came back 3 days later. Request acknowledged. File review in progress. Estimated completion time, 45-60 days. 45 days. Miller would have 6 weeks to continue his campaign while Maya sat in professional limbo. But then something unexpected happened. On a Tuesday morning in late March, Chen burst into Maya's office with a printed announcement. Admiral's visit. Inspector General inspection, starting Monday. Admiral Patricia Hendress, I know who she is, Maya said quietly. Admiral Hendress had been the oversight commander for multiple Joint Special Operations Command missions during Maya's deployment cycle. She'd been a captain then, running tactical operations coordination from a secure facility in Qatar. Maya had met her exactly twice, once during a mission brief, once during a debriefing after a particularly difficult operation. The Admiral wouldn't remember her. Maya had been one of dozens of operators cycling through, a specialized attachment rather than a primary team member. Their interactions had been brief and professional, but the Admiral would have the clearance to access Maya's complete file. If Rodriguez's investigation was still ongoing during the IG visit, if the Admiral reviewed personnel actions, it was a thin hope, but it was something. Admiral Patricia Hendress arrived at Camp Pendleton with a 5-person team on a Monday morning that felt like every other inspection day Maya had endured. Heightened alert, nervous leadership, and Marines scrambling to ensure every detail was perfect. The supply depot had been inspected visited informally by Rodriguez the week before. Everything was in order. Maya had ensured that. Her inventory reconciliation was 99.8% accurate. Her security protocols exceeded requirements, and her paperwork was immaculate. If there was one thing Maya knew how to do, it was follow regulations precisely. The Admiral's team arrived at the depot at 11:30. Maya stood at attention near her desk, freshly pressed uniform, regulation haircut, ribbons properly aligned. The tremor in her left hand was moderate today, visible if you looked closely, but not debilitating. Admiral Hendress was a woman in her late 50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a tight bun, and the kind of presence that commanded attention without volume. She wore the insignia of her rank with the ease of someone who'd earned every advancement through decades of competent service. "Staff Sergeant Reeves," the Admiral said, reviewing the clipboard one of her team members handed her. "Supply Operations Chief." "Yes, ma'am. I see you've been in this billet for 18 months. Previous assignment?" "Maritime Operations, ma'am. Persian Gulf region." The Admiral's eyes flicked up from the clipboard. "Maritime Operations, that's vague." "Yes, ma'am. Why the reassignment to garrison duty?" "Medical evaluation, ma'am. TBI sustained during operations in Afghanistan. I was deemed unfit for forward deployment and reassigned to logistics." The Admiral studied her for a moment. "How's your performance been in this role?" "I believe my records speak for themselves, ma'am. Inventory accuracy has improved 73% since I took over. Security protocols have been enhanced, and processing times are well below Marine Corps standards." "I've reviewed your file," the Admiral said. "It also shows you're currently under investigation for potential security violations." "Care to explain?" Maya felt her heart rate spike, but kept her voice level. "A complaint was filed by Sergeant Miller, ma'am, alleging that I misrepresented my clearance level and discussed classified information inappropriately. I've submitted a formal response and requested a complete security review. I maintain that the allegations are based on misunderstandings." "Sergeant Miller," the Admiral glanced at her team. "He's the one who raised concerns about supply operations during our initial interviews, correct?" "Yes, ma'am," one of the team members confirmed. "Multiple complaints about Staff Sergeant Reeves's fitness for duty." "Interesting." The Admiral turned back to Maya. "Sergeant Miller seems quite invested in your professional status. Any idea why?" "I believe Sergeant Miller has concerns about my medical condition and its impact on my work, ma'am. He's expressed skepticism about whether someone with TBI should be in a position of responsibility." "Has he?" The Admiral's tone was flat, unreadable. "And what do you think about that?" "I think my performance record demonstrates my capability, ma'am, but I also understand that visible limitations can create doubt. I can't fault someone for questioning whether I'm fit for duty. I can only prove it through my work." The Admiral nodded slowly. "Show me your security procedures." Maya spent the next 20 minutes walking the Admiral through her protocols, how classified materials were stored, how access was logged and audited, how she maintained separation between different classification levels in the inventory system. It was thorough, professional, and by the book. When they finished, the Admiral stepped closer, close enough that the conversation became private, even with her team members nearby. "Staff Sergeant, I'm going to ask you a question, and I need you to answer carefully. Have you ever had a security clearance above secret level?" Maya met the Admiral's eyes. "Ma'am, I cannot discuss details of my clearance history without proper authorization. What I can say is that my complete security file contains information that would clarify any questions about my access and knowledge." "That's not a denial." "No, ma'am, it's not." The Admiral glanced down, very briefly, very subtly, at Maya's left side, where her uniform shirt met her belt line. When her eyes returned to Maya's face, there was something different in her expression. Recognition? Calculation? Maya couldn't be certain. "I want to see your personnel file, the complete file, including any classified annexes." "Ma'am, you'll need to request that through Buper's Special Operations Division. Standard personnel channels won't." "I know how to access compartmentalized files, Staff Sergeant." The Admiral turned to her team. "Continue the inspection here. I need to speak with the battalion commander." She left, her team remaining behind to complete their review of the supply depot. Maya returned to her duties, trying to suppress the flicker of hope that had ignited. The Admiral's reaction had been subtle, but it was there. Something had registered. The question was whether it would matter. 2 hours later, Captain Rodriguez appeared at the supply depot, his expression carefully neutral. "Staff Sergeant Reeves, you're wanted at the battalion commander's office." Admiral's request. Maya secured her workstation and followed Rodriguez across the base. Neither spoke during the walk. When they arrived at the colonel's office suite, they were directed to a small conference room. Inside, Admiral Hendress sat alone at the table, a thick folder open in front of her. Maya recognized the color-coded tabs, compartmentalized security annexes. "Sit down, Staff Sergeant," the Admiral said. "Captain Rodriguez, please close the door and remain. This conversation is classified top secret, special access program level." Rodriguez's eyebrows rose, but he complied. Maya sat, her mind racing. The Admiral had accessed her complete file. That meant, "Captain," the Admiral continued, "what I'm I'm about to show you will clarify the security investigation you've been conducting. Staff Sergeant Reeves was not misrepresenting her clearance level. In fact, her actual clearance history makes Sergeant Miller's allegations not just wrong, but dangerously ignorant. She rotated the folder so Rodriguez could see it. His eyes widened as he scanned the pages. This says she was attached to... Ma'am, I don't have clearance to read most of this. You have clearance to read the summary, which is sufficient. The short version: Staff Sergeant Reeves was part of a specialized program that embedded intelligence and combat support personnel in Naval Special Warfare Development Group operations. She held a top-secret SCI clearance with multiple special access program compartments. Her tattoo, the Admiral glanced at Maya. The one on your left ribcage. Staff Sergeant, that's an operational identifier, isn't it? Maya hesitated, then nodded. Yes, ma'am. Show him. Maya unbuttoned the lower portion of her uniform shirt and lifted the undershirt beneath, revealing the Phoenix tattoo on her left ribcage. What appeared to be abstract artistic elements were actually encoded coordinates and operational identifiers. Rodriguez stared. What am I looking at? You're looking at proof that Staff Sergeant Reeves operated in environments and missions that remain classified at the highest levels, the Admiral said. The tremor in her hand, that's from a traumatic brain injury sustained during an operation that officially never happened. Her maritime operations in the Persian Gulf, that was the cover story for her actual assignment. Then why is she in a supply depot? Rodriguez asked. Because your medical evaluation system is designed for conventional injuries, not for the complex presentation of TBI and high-functioning operators. The doctors saw the tremor, the balance issues, the migraines, and made a blanket determination unfit for combat duty. They never assessed whether she was fit for other valuable roles: training, intelligence analysis, specialized instruction. They just warehoused her. The Admiral's voice carried anger now, controlled but present. And then Sergeant Miller, in his infinite wisdom, decided that her visible limitations meant she was incompetent. He harassed her, questioned her fitness, and when she didn't fold, he manufactured a security complaint to get her removed. Rodriguez looked pale. Ma'am, I didn't know. The file I had access to showed exactly what it was supposed to show. Compartmented information stays compartmented, but that doesn't excuse the failure of leadership here. The Admiral stood. Captain, your investigation into Staff Sergeant Reeves is over. The allegations are without merit. What I want now is a complete report on Sergeant Miller's conduct, including every interaction he's had with Staff Sergeant Reeves over the past 2 months. Yes, ma'am. Staff Sergeant, the Admiral turned to Maya. I'm going to be blunt. You were mishandled by the medical system, underutilized by your command, and harassed by a non-commissioned officer who should have known better. That's a triple failure, and I intend to address all three. But first, I need to know something. Do you want to fight this? Because if you do, I'll back you. If you'd rather just move on and let it drop, I'll respect that too. Maya considered carefully. She could take the easy path, accept vindication, let Miller face minor consequences, continue her quiet existence in the supply depot. It was safe, it was simple, but it was also wrong, because she wasn't the only veteran who'd been mishandled this way. She wasn't the only operator whose TBI had been treated as a binary on-off switch for capability, rather than a complex condition requiring individual assessment. I want to fight, ma'am, Maya said, not for revenge, but because this system failed me, and it's failing others. If there's a way to change that, I want to be part of it. Admiral Hendress smiled, a small, fierce expression. Good. Then let's go make some people uncomfortable. The Admiral insisted on addressing the situation publicly, not to humiliate Miller, though that would be a side effect, but to make a point about leadership, about capability assessment, and about the institutional failures that led to valuable personnel being discarded. The venue was a mandatory all-hands formation for the battalion, scheduled for 1400 the following day. Word spread quickly that something significant was happening. The Admiral herself would be speaking, and attendance was non-negotiable. Maya stood in formation with her unit, regulation distance from the Marine to her left and right. Miller was 3 rows back, his expression confident. He clearly believed this was about his complaint, about validation of his concerns. Admiral Hendress took the platform without preamble. I've spent the past 2 days conducting an inspection of this installation, she began, her voice carrying across the assembled formation. I've reviewed operations, logistics, personnel management, and leadership. Most of what I've seen meets standards. Some exceeds standards, and some represents a failure so profound that it requires immediate address. The battalion tensed. Public criticism from a flag officer was rare and serious. This morning, I concluded an investigation into allegations made against Staff Sergeant Maya Reeves. Sergeant Miller, she paused, locating him in formation. You filed a complaint alleging that Staff Sergeant Reeves had misrepresented her security clearance, improperly accessed classified systems, and shared operational information inappropriately. Is that correct? Miller stood at attention. Yes, ma'am. I filed that complaint in good faith, based on... You filed it in ignorance. The Admiral cut him off. Staff Sergeant Reeves holds, or held, during her operational service, one of the highest security clearances available in the Department of Defense. Her Maritime Operations cover story concealed an assignment to Naval Special Warfare Development Group operations. The classified information you claimed she inappropriately discussed, she lived it, she earned it, she bled for it. The formation was dead silent. Maya could feel eyes turning toward her, feel the shift in perception rippling through the assembled Marines. But here's what troubles me more than your ignorance, Sergeant Miller. You saw a Marine with a visible injury, a tremor, balance issues, the aftermath of traumatic brain injury sustained in combat, and you concluded she was weak. You concluded she was broken. You concluded she didn't belong. The Admiral's voice hardened. You saw someone who'd sacrificed more than you can imagine, and instead of asking how you could support her, how you could utilize her experience, how you could learn from her, you decided to harass her until she quit or got transferred. Miller's face had gone red. Torres and Davidson, standing near him, looked uncomfortable. That represents a failure of leadership. Not just your failure, but a systemic failure. We have created a culture where visible injury is treated as incompetence, where warriors who've given everything are discarded because they don't fit our narrow definition of fit for duty. The Admiral turned to address the full formation. How many of you have worked with Staff Sergeant Reeves? A scattering of hands went up. Keep your hands raised if you've ever seen her make a significant mistake, miss a deadline, or fail to meet standards. Every hand went down except one, a lance corporal who sheepishly explained when the Admiral called on him that Reeves had once caught and corrected his error on a requisition form. Exactly. Her performance is exemplary, but because she has a tremor, because she occasionally needs to compensate for balance issues, because her injury is visible, she was judged as less capable. That's not just wrong, it's dangerous, because we're wasting talent. We're losing institutional knowledge. We're telling our wounded warriors that once they're injured, they're useless. The Admiral paused, letting that sink in. I'm told that after the IED blast that gave Staff Sergeant Reeves her TBI, she continued to operate for another 40 minutes, completing her mission and ensuring her team's safe extraction before allowing herself to be evacuated. She did that with a concussion, with broken bones, with bleeding in her brain. She did her job. Maya felt her throat tighten. She'd never reported those details. They must have been in her medical records, buried in the classified annexes. And then she came back here, to this battalion, and what did we do? We stuck her in a warehouse and expected her to be grateful she still had a job. And when she excelled at that job, when she improved every metric and maintained standards that exceeded regulation, we let a sergeant with a fraction of her experience question her worth. Admiral Hendress turned back to Miller. Sergeant, you're relieved of your current duties effective immediately. Report to the battalion commander within the hour for reassignment. I'm also recommending non-judicial punishment for conduct unbecoming. Your failure wasn't that you questioned a Marine's capability, it's that you did it with malice, ignorance, and a complete absence of the leadership this Corps demands. Ma'am, Miller started. Dismissed, Sergeant. Miller saluted stiffly and left formation, Torres and Davidson following uncertainly. The Admiral continued, addressing the battalion. Let me be clear about the standard I expect. When you encounter a Marine with visible limitations, injury, disability, medical conditions, your first question should not be, can they still do the job? It should be, how can I help them do the job? Because capability doesn't disappear with injury. It adapts, it evolves, it finds new forms. She gestured to Maya. Staff Sergeant Reeves can't deploy forward anymore. Her TBI prevents that, and that's a legitimate limitation. But she can teach, she can mentor, she can share tactical knowledge with junior Marines, she can improve systems and protocols, she can contribute in a dozen different ways, if we let her, if we support her, if we lead. The Admiral's voice softened slightly. This Corps was built on the principle that we never leave a Marine behind. That doesn't just mean in combat. It means in garrison. It means during recovery. It means recognizing that wounded warriors still have value, still have purpose, still deserve respect. She scanned the formation. I'm going to be recommending significant changes to how we assess and utilize personnel with combat-related injuries. Those recommendations will start here, with this battalion, because you're going to be the test case. Starting next month, we'll be implementing new protocols for capability assessment, new training programs for wounded warrior integration, new leadership standards for how we treat Marines in transition. The Admiral stepped down from the platform and walked directly to where Maya stood in formation. Maya snapped to attention. Staff Sergeant Reeves, the Admiral said, her voice carrying but clearly addressing Maya directly. I'm offering you a choice. You can remain in your current billet, continue your excellent work in supply operations, and I'll ensure you're properly supported and respected. Or, she paused, you can take a position as the senior enlisted advisor for a new program I'm establishing, the Warrior Transition Initiative. It would mean working directly with medical personnel, command staff, and wounded veterans to redesign how we assess capability and provide transition support. Maya's mind raced. Stay in the safety of the supply depot, or step into something new, uncertain, and potentially more difficult, but also potentially more meaningful? Ma'am, I'd be honored to work on the Warrior Transition Initiative. Outstanding. Report to my team tomorrow morning. 0800. We have a lot of work to do. The Admiral turned back to the formation. This is what right looks like, Marines. Support your people. Recognize their value. Lead with intelligence and compassion. Dismissed. The battalion dispersed slowly, Marines talking in low voices, processing what they'd just witnessed. Maya remained at attention until the formation officially broke, then found herself surrounded by people she'd worked with. Chen, Corporal Williams from adjacent supply unit, even some of the junior Marines who'd seemed distant during the investigation. Holy shit, Reeves, Chen said. DEVGRU, you were working with SEAL Team 6? Can't talk about specifics, Maya said automatically. But yeah, adjacent operations. And you never said anything. Would you believe me if I had? Before today? Chen considered. Probably not. I mean, you're good at your job, but I guess I saw what Miller saw. The tremor, the occasional blank moments. I assumed you'd been in combat, but not that kind of combat. That's the problem, Maya said. We assume injury means incompetence, but my brain still works, just differently than before. A small crowd had formed, Marines wanting to hear more, wanting to understand. Maya obliged as much as she could without revealing classified details, explaining how TBI affected some functions but not others, how adaptation was possible, how training could overcome limitations. It was exhausting, but it was also necessary, because if this new program was going to work, if the system was actually going to change, then people needed to understand what they were looking at when they saw a wounded warrior. Rodriguez approached as the crowd thinned. Staff Sergeant, I owe you an apology. Sir, you were working with the information you had. I should have pushed harder for the complete file. I should have questioned Miller's motives more thoroughly. I let my own assumptions about TBI influence my judgment. Rodriguez looked genuinely pained. That's exactly what the Admiral was talking about. Leadership failure. With respect, sir, you weren't the one who failed. The system failed. You followed the protocols you were given. The problem is that the protocols are inadequate. Maya paused. That's what we're going to fix. Is that really possible? Changing how the entire Department of Defense handles wounded warrior assessment? Probably not entirely, but we can make it better. We can create pathways for people like me, people who have capability but need accommodation. We can teach leaders to look deeper than surface limitations. Maya smiled slightly. And we can make sure that the next Marine with TBI doesn't end up spending 18 months in a supply depot because nobody knew what else to do with them. For the record, Rodriguez said, you were exceptional in that supply depot. Best supply chief I've had. Thank you, sir. But I'm also ready for what comes next. 3 days later, Maya was working in her temporary office, a small space in the battalion headquarters building, when she saw Miller through the window, standing at attention outside the colonel's office. He was there for his non-judicial punishment hearing. She'd been asked to provide a statement about his conduct, which she'd done in careful factual detail. She hadn't exaggerated, hadn't embellished. She'd simply documented every interaction, every comment, every action. The pattern spoke for itself. Chen appeared in her doorway. You watching the Miller situation? Not intentionally. He's just outside. Word is he's getting busted down to corporal, forfeiture of pay, and reassignment to a different unit, plus a formal letter of reprimand in his permanent record. That seems appropriate, Maya said. You're not happy about it? I'm not unhappy, but I'm also not celebrating. Miller's punishment doesn't fix the system that allowed him to harass me for 2 months before anyone intervened. It doesn't change the fact that without Admiral Hendriss's intervention, I might have been forced out entirely. Maya turned away from the window. This isn't about Miller. It never was. He's just one symptom of a larger problem. The Admiral seems to think you can fix that problem, not alone, but maybe as part of a team, with the right support, with institutional backing. Maya trailed off. We'll see. Miller emerged from the colonel's office 30 minutes later, his face expressionless, but his posture defeated. He walked past Maya's window without looking in, headed toward whatever came next in his reduced career. Maya felt a complex mix of emotions. Satisfaction that he'd faced consequences, yes, but also something like pity. Miller had been wrong, had been malicious even, but he'd also been a product of the same flawed system. He'd been taught that strength meant absence of visible weakness, that capability meant physical perfection, that leadership meant weeding out anyone who didn't meet a narrow standard. Those teachings were wrong, but they were pervasive, and changing them would require more than punishing one sergeant. Admiral Hendriss's team set up operations in a conference room that quickly transformed into a planning center. Maps, regulations, medical studies, and policy documents covered every available surface. Maya found herself working alongside medical officers, psychologists, policy analysts, and senior NCOs from multiple branches. The mission, redesign capability assessment for wounded warriors. The current system is binary. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, a Navy neuropsychologist, explained during their first full team meeting. You're either fit for duty or you're not. But capability, especially with TBI and PTSD exists on a spectrum. We need a framework that captures that nuance. We also need buy-in from commanders, Master Gunnery Sergeant Jackson added. He was a Marine with 26 years of service and a prosthetic leg from Afghanistan. No policy works if leadership sees it as bureaucratic burden rather than force multiplier. Maya listened carefully, absorbing the competing priorities and constraints. Medical accuracy versus operational simplicity. Individual accommodation versus unit cohesion. Cost of implementation versus long-term value. Admiral Hendress let the discussion continue for an hour before intervening. Here's our guiding principle, she said. We start from a position of capability rather than limitation. When we assess a wounded warrior, our first question is, what can they still do? Not, what can't they do anymore? We build from strength. That's a fundamental shift in perspective, one of the policy analysts noted. Current medical evaluations focus on identifying impairment, which is necessary for treatment, Dr. Chen agreed, but not sufficient for capability assessment. We need to separate medical diagnosis from functional evaluation. The team began sketching out a framework. It would involve multiple assessment phases: medical evaluation to establish diagnosis and limitations, functional testing to determine actual capability, individualized accommodation planning, and periodic reassessment to account for recovery or deterioration. Maya's role was to provide the operator perspective, what actually mattered in terms of performance, what accommodations were realistic, what training adaptations could compensate for limitations. Take marksmanship, she explained during one planning session. My TBI affects my balance, which impacts my shooting stance. Traditional training would say I need to fix my balance before I can shoot effectively, but that might never fully recover. Instead, I adapted my stance to work with my limitations. The result is equally accurate, just different. That's the kind of thinking we need to build into the system. How do we scale that? Jackson asked. Every injury is different. Every person is different. We can't create individualized programs for thousands of wounded warriors. We don't need individualized programs, Maya countered. We need flexible frameworks and trained leaders who can apply them appropriately. Teach commanders and NCOs to look for adaptive capability rather than standard compliance. Give them tools to assess function rather than just diagnosis. The work was intellectually demanding in ways that Maya hadn't experienced since her operational days. Her TBI created challenges. She had to take frequent breaks when the cognitive load triggered migraines. She needed written notes to compensate for short-term memory issues. She occasionally lost track of conversations during longer meetings, but she also brought insights that no one else on the team possessed. She understood viscerally what it meant to navigate the military system with an invisible injury, to be simultaneously capable and limited, to fight for recognition of value that didn't fit standard categories. Chapter 16, the pilot program. After 6 weeks of planning, the team was ready to launch a pilot program. 14 veterans had been identified as potential participants. Marines and Navy personnel who'd been medically retired or relegated to limited duty despite potentially having remaining capability. Maya reviewed each file carefully. There was Lieutenant Marcus Webb, a Marine pilot with vision impairment from a blast injury, medically retired despite perfect instrument flying scores. Sergeant Rachel Torres, an intelligence analyst with PTSD, limited to administrative duty despite her language skills and regional expertise. Corporal James Kim, an explosive ordnance technician with hearing loss, forced out of EOD despite his technical expertise. Hospital Corpsman First Class Sarah Mendez, with complex PTSD from combat. Medical operations, unable to deploy but highly skilled in trauma training, and 10 others, each with unique combinations of injury, capability, and unrealized potential. The pilot program would bring them all to San Diego for a 2-week intensive assessment, medical evaluation, functional testing, psychological support, and capability matching with potential new billets or roles. This is going to be hard, Dr. Chen warned during the team's final planning meeting. Some of these people have been told they're done, they're broken, they're useless. Getting them to believe they still have value, that's going to take more than good assessments. That's where the peer support matters, Maya said. They need to see others like them succeeding. They need to see that adaptation is possible. Can you do that? Admiral Hendress asked. Can you be that example? Maya considered. Her TBI was managed but not cured. She still had bad days, still struggled with certain tasks, still dealt with migraines and cognitive slips, and moments where her body simply didn't cooperate. But she was also functional, contributing, and finding purpose in the work. Yes, ma'am, I can do that. The 14 participants arrived on a Monday morning in late May. Maya stood in the conference room that had been set up for their initial gathering, watching them file in with varying degrees of skepticism, hope, and exhaustion. Lieutenant Webb walked with a slight hesitation, his vision impairment evident in how carefully he navigated the space. Sergeant Torres had the hypervigilant posture Maya recognized from her own PTSD struggles. goggles, constantly scanning, never fully at ease. Corporal Kim wore hearing aids that he kept adjusting, uncomfortable with the reminder of his limitation. They were all wounded. They were all still capable. They just needed someone to see it. Admiral Hendress opened the session. Welcome to the Warrior Transition Initiative pilot program. Over the next 2 weeks, you're going to undergo the most comprehensive capability assessment the Department of Defense has ever attempted. We're going to identify what you can still do, what you want to do, and how we can make that happen. She gestured to Maya. Staff Sergeant Reeves is the senior enlisted advisor for this program. She's also a wounded warrior with TBI from classified operations. She's going to tell you what this program is really about and why you should give it a chance. Maya stepped forward, feeling 14 pairs of eyes assessing her, looking for signs of the damage they'd all been told defined them. I'm not going to lie to you, Maya began. This is going to be difficult. Not just the assessments, but confronting the gap between who you were and who you are now. I've been there. I am there every day. My tremor, she held up her left hand, letting them see it, is visible. My balance issues are real. I have migraines that can disable me for hours. I forget things. I lose time. I struggle. She paused, making eye contact with each participant. But I also shoot expert. I can process tactical information faster than most Marines I work with. I can teach, mentor, and contribute in ways that matter. My capability didn't disappear with my injury. It changed. And that's what this program is about. Identifying what changed, not what was lost. Torres raised her hand. But what if what changed means we can't go back to what we were trained for? I can't deploy to combat zones anymore. My PTSD makes that impossible. So what's the point? The point, Maya said, is that combat deployment isn't the only way to serve. You have language skills, regional expertise, analytical capability. That doesn't disappear because you can't be in a firefight anymore. We need to find roles where those skills matter, where you can contribute without triggering your PTSD. That's what they said at the VA, Kim interjected bitterly. They'd find me something. Then they offered me a job filing paperwork. This isn't the VA, Admiral Hendress cut in. This is the Department of Defense trying to fix a system that's been wasting talent like yours for decades. We're not looking for make-work positions. We're looking for how to properly utilize your capability. Over the next 2 weeks, the program unfolded exactly as designed. Each participant underwent comprehensive medical evaluation to establish baseline limitations, functional capability testing in their areas of expertise, psychological assessment, and PTSD TBI management strategies, individual meetings with career counselors and command representatives, peer support sessions where they could share experiences and strategies. Maya participated in all of it, both as an organizer and as a peer. She shared her own struggles openly. The day she'd lost 2 hours and found herself sitting in her car with no memory of driving there. The times when migraines made even standing upright agonizing. The frustration of having tactical knowledge that she couldn't fully utilize anymore. But she also shared her adaptations. The modified shooting stance that compensated for balance issues. The cognitive strategies that helped manage memory problems. The ways she'd learned to recognize when she was approaching her limits and needed to step back. The participants responded slowly, cautiously, but genuinely. They began to see that acknowledgement of limitation wasn't admission of worthlessness. That adaptation wasn't surrender. On the final day of the pilot program, the team gathered to present their findings to the participants. 12 of the 14 had been matched with potential new billets or roles that utilized their capabilities while accommodating their limitations. Lieutenant Webb would be reassigned to training command, teaching instrument flying, and developing simulation protocols. His vision impairment didn't affect his ability to instruct or his deep understanding of flight systems. Sergeant Torres would move into intelligence analysis focused on Middle Eastern regional issues, working from a secure facility stateside rather than deploying forward. Her PTSD made combat zones impossible, but her expertise was desperately needed. Corporal Kim would transition to EOD training and curriculum development, using his technical knowledge to improve how new technicians were taught. His hearing loss prevented him from doing the physical EOD work, but his understanding of the discipline remained invaluable. Hospital Corpsman Mendez would become a trauma training specialist, using her combat medical experience to prepare new corpsmen for deployment without having to deploy herself. The other 8 had similar outcomes, roles that recognized their capability while respecting their limitations. 2 participants couldn't be matched effectively. Their injuries were too severe, their limitations too extensive. They would be medically retired with full honors and support, but the military simply didn't have roles that fit their remaining capabilities. It was honest, difficult, and necessary. This is what success looks like, Admiral Hendress told the assembled group. Not everyone can stay, not everyone should, but for those who can contribute, who want to serve, who have capability remaining, we owe them the opportunity. She turned to Maya. Staff Sergeant Reeves, you've done something remarkable here. You've shown that leadership isn't about pushing through limitations or pretending they don't exist. It's about working with reality to achieve the best possible outcome. outcome. That's what every leader should strive for. Maya felt the weight of that recognition, not the rank or the praise, but the acknowledgement of what mattered. She'd helped create something that would outlast her individual contribution. "Ma'am," Maya said, "this is just the beginning. 14 people out of thousands who need this kind of support. We have to scale this, make it institutional, ensure it doesn't disappear when you move on to your next assignment." Agreed, which is why I'm recommending that the Warrior Transition Initiative become a permanent program across all services, and I'm recommending you as the senior enlisted advisor for the expanded program. Maya's breath caught. A permanent program. Real institutional change. The chance to help thousands of wounded warriors instead of just 14. "I'm honored, ma'am, but I need to be honest about my limitations. My TBI is managed but not cured. I have bad days, sometimes bad weeks. I might not be able to maintain the pace that a program this size would require, which is exactly why you're the right person for the job," Admiral Hendress said, "because you understand from experience that capability doesn't mean perfection. You'll build a program that accounts for the reality of wounded warriors, not an idealized version that doesn't exist. You'll lead by example, showing that you can contribute meaningfully while also managing limitations." Maya looked at the 14 participants, at the team members who'd worked so hard, at the Admiral who'd made this all possible. "Then I accept, ma'am. Let's change how this system works." The Warrior Transition Initiative, now officially redesignated as the Silent Emblem Project in recognition of the warriors whose sacrifices remained classified, expanded to all major military installations across the United States. Maya had traveled to 7 bases in the past 3 months, establishing local programs, training assessment teams, and meeting with commanders who ranged from enthusiastic supporters to skeptical obstacles. Today, she was back at Camp Pendleton, in an office that had once seemed impossibly ambitious and now felt almost routine. The tremor in her left hand was pronounced. It had been a rough week, with 3 migraines in 5 days, but she'd learned to work through the moderate days and rest during the severe ones. Chen, who'd transferred to work as her administrative assistant in the new program, appeared in her doorway with coffee and a concerned expression. "You look terrible." "Thank you for that candid assessment, Corporal," Maya said dryly. "I'm serious, Reeves. You're pushing too hard. When's the last time you took a full day off?" Maya tried to remember and couldn't. "I take evenings off." "Evenings where you answer emails until 2200 and then can't sleep because you're thinking about the next cohort assessment?" Chen set down the coffee firmly. "You're supposed to be modeling healthy limitation management. Instead, you're showing everyone that the way to succeed with TBI is to ignore your limitations and power through." He was right, and Maya knew it. She'd fallen into the same trap she'd been warning others about, trying to prove her worth by being superhuman rather than by being appropriately human. "Okay," she admitted. "You're right. I'll take this weekend off. Completely off." "Good, because Admiral Hendress is flying in Monday, and she specifically asked me to make sure you weren't burned out before her visit." Maya's attention sharpened. "The Admiral's coming here? Why?" "She didn't say, just that she needed to meet with you and review the program's progress." Chen paused. "Also, there's someone waiting in conference room B, a sergeant from your old unit in Afghanistan. She says it's personal, not official business." Maya's memory flickered through faces and names from Afghanistan. "Did she give a name?" "Sergeant Jennifer Holt. She said you'd remember her as Jen from EOD." Maya did remember. Holt had been one of the explosive ordnance disposal technicians attached to the operation where Maya had taken her IED blast. They'd worked together for 6 months, had shared the kind of trust that came from repeatedly putting your life in someone else's hands. She found Holt in the conference room, staring out the window at the Pacific Ocean visible in the distance. The sergeant turned when Maya entered, and the recognition was immediate and painful. Holt looked thin, her face carrying the haunted expression Maya knew too well. "PTSD, probably severe." "Reeves," Holt said. "Or should I say Staff Sergeant?" "Maya's fine. It's good to see you, Jen." She gestured to the chairs. "Sit. Tell me what's going on." Holt sat, her hands restless on the table. "I heard about your program, the Silent Emblem Project. I heard you were helping wounded warriors find their way back to purpose." She laughed bitterly. "I need that, because right now, I don't have purpose. I have nightmares, panic attacks, and a medical discharge pending." "What happened?" "Same thing that happened to you. IED. Different incident, different year, but same result. I was clearing a route in Kandahar last year when one went off. Killed 2 Marines in the vehicle behind me. I survived because I was in the lead vehicle, far enough away that I only got thrown 30 feet instead of vaporized." Holt's voice was flat, reciting facts without emotion. "Broken ribs, concussion, some shrapnel. Physical injuries healed. Mental ones didn't. PTSD, severe. I can't be near vehicles anymore without hyperventilating. Can't handle loud noises. Can't focus for more than 20 minutes before I start dissociating. The Corps says I'm unfit for duty, and they're probably right. But they're also saying I should just move on, find a civilian job, forget I ever was a Marine." Maya understood. The medical retirement recruitment process was clinical, efficient, and emotionally devastating. Here's your disability rating. Here's your pension. Good luck with the rest of your life. It treated service members like equipment being decommissioned rather than people losing their identity. How did you hear about Silent Emblem? Military grapevine. Someone told someone who told me that there was a program at Pendleton helping people like us. So I drove here from Arizona, showed up at the gate, and asked for you specifically. Holt met Maya's eyes. I don't know if you can help me. I don't even know if I want to stay in the military, but I need to know that I'm not just broken garbage being thrown away. Maya felt the familiar ache of recognition. This was the core wound that all of them carried, not just the physical or psychological damage, but the existential question of whether they still had value. You're not garbage, Jen. You're injured. There's a difference. Maya pulled out her tablet and began pulling up files. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to put you in our next assessment cohort starting in 2 weeks. We'll do a full evaluation, medical, psychological, functional capability. We'll identify what you can still do, what you want to do, and what accommodations you need, and then we'll find a way to make that work. And if there isn't a way, then we'll help you transition out with dignity and purpose. We'll connect you with veteran support networks, help you build a civilian career that uses your skills, and make sure you're not going through it alone. Maya paused. But Jen, I've seen your work. I know what you're capable of. My guess is we're going to find something. Holt's eyes were wet. I don't know if I can do this. You drove here from Arizona on your own initiative because you refused to give up. You can absolutely do this. It's just going to be hard, and it's going to take time, and you're going to have bad days where you want to quit. But that's true for all of us. She held up her left hand, letting Holt see the tremor. This doesn't go away. The TBI doesn't get cured. But I'm still here, still serving, still contributing. You can be too, if you want to be. Holt wiped her eyes. Okay, sign me up. Admiral Hendress arrived on Monday morning with an entourage that included several flag officers Maya didn't recognize and a civilian in an expensive suit who turned out to be an assistant secretary of defense. The meeting was in the base commander's conference room, formal and slightly intimidating. Maya had prepared a comprehensive briefing on the Silent Emblem project's progress. 127 wounded warriors assessed, 94 successfully placed in new billets or roles, 21 assisted with medical retirement and civilian transition, 12 still in evaluation. She walked through the data methodically, using her right hand to advance slides when her left hand's tremor made the presentation remote difficult to manage. She didn't apologize for it or explain it. It simply was. The assistant secretary asked pointed questions about cost, about scalability, about legal liability if a reassessed warrior failed in their new role. Maya answered each one directly, providing data where it existed and honest uncertainty where it didn't. The legal question is the stickiest, she admitted. If we say someone is capable of a role and they fail, there could be claims that we improperly assess them. But the alternative, categorically excluding all wounded warriors from roles they could potentially perform, is both wasteful and unjust. We're recommending a phased approach, initial trial periods, regular reassessment, and clear documentation of both capabilities and limitations. That requires trusting commanders to make nuanced judgments. One of the flag officers noted, not all commanders are capable of that, which is why we're building training modules on wounded warrior leadership, Maya countered, teaching commanders and senior NCOs how to assess functional capability rather than just reading medical files. But you're right, this requires a culture shift, not just a policy change. That takes time. Admiral Hendress had been quiet throughout the briefing, letting Maya handle the questions. Now she spoke. What Staff Sergeant Reeves isn't telling you is that this program exists because the current system failed her catastrophically. She was a high-value asset with specialized capabilities, and we stuck her in a supply depot because her medical evaluation focused on what she couldn't do rather than what she could. How many others have we lost that way? How much talent have we wasted? The assistant secretary nodded slowly. I've been reviewing the data on medical retirements over the past decade. We've discharged over 40,000 service members for combat-related injuries. If even 10% of them could have continued serving in modified roles, that's 4,000 people and billions of dollars in training and experience that we simply threw away. Exactly, the Admiral said. This isn't just compassionate, it's economically and operationally sensible, which is why I'm recommending that Silent Emblem be expanded from a project to a permanent DoD program with dedicated funding and institutional support. The room went quiet. That was a significant escalation from experimental initiative to established institution. What would that require? The assistant secretary asked. Admiral Hendress pulled out a thick briefing folder. Full proposal is here. Short version. Dedicated assessment centers at major installations. Trained staff at each center. Policy changes to allow for individualized capability assessments and leadership training across all services. We're estimating initial funding of $200 million over 3 years. One of the flag officers whistled. That's a significant significant investment. Compared to the cost of recruiting and training 40,000 replacement service members, it's a bargain. The Admiral turned to Maya. Staff Sergeant, what do you need to make this work if we get the funding? Maya had thought about this extensively. 3 things, ma'am. First, authority. Assessment centers need to have the power to override standard medical retirement protocols when functional capability exceeds diagnostic limitations. Second, accountability. Commanders who refuse to work with the program or who discriminate against wounded warriors need to face consequences. Third, patience. Culture change doesn't happen overnight. We need to give this at least 5 years before judging its full effectiveness. The Assistant Secretary was making notes. Those are reasonable requirements. I'll take this to the Secretary and recommend approval. He looked at Maya directly. Staff Sergeant, if this gets funded, we're going to need you in Washington. Policy development, congressional briefings, coordination across services. Are you prepared for that? Maya felt her heart rate spike. Washington, D.C., the Pentagon, high-level policy work. It was far outside her comfort zone, would be incredibly demanding, and would require her to function at a level that her TBI made challenging on bad days. But it was also the next evolution of the mission. Yes, sir, I'm prepared. Even with your medical limitations? Especially with my medical limitations, sir, because I'll build a program that accounts for reality rather than idealized capability. That's what wounded warriors need. Systems designed by people who understand the actual challenges, not just the theoretical ones. The Assistant Secretary smiled. Fair point. Expect a call from my office within 2 weeks. After the meeting, Admiral Hendricks pulled Maya aside. You know what you just signed up for, right? DC politics, bureaucratic battles, endless briefings with people who don't want change. It's going to be brutal. More brutal than an IED blast, ma'am? Different kind of brutal. That one was over in seconds. This one will grind at you for years. The Admiral's expression softened. But I also think you're exactly the right person for it, because you won't let them turn this into a feel-good PR initiative. You'll fight for real change. That's the plan, ma'am. Good. Now go take the rest of the week off before I have to make it an order. Chen's been sending me worried messages about your schedule. Maya smiled. Yes, ma'am. 3 months later, Maya returned to Camp Pendleton for the graduation of the 7th Silent Emblem cohort. 22 wounded warriors had completed the assessment process. 19 were being reassigned to new roles that utilized their capabilities. 3 were transitioning to civilian life with full support and connections to veteran networks. Among the graduates was Sergeant Jennifer Holt, who'd been matched with a position in EOD training development. She couldn't clear routes anymore, but she could teach others how to do it safely, using her experience to improve curriculum and save lives. The graduation ceremony was small, held in a conference room rather than on a parade ground. These warriors didn't need public recognition. Most of their service had been quiet anyway, the kind of work that never made headlines. What they needed was acknowledgement that they still had value, still had purpose, still belonged. Maya stood at the front of the room, her dress uniform crisp despite the humid California evening. The tremor in her left hand was minimal today. A good day, the kind she was grateful for but never took for granted. 7 months ago, she began. Admiral Hendricks stood in front of a battalion formation and talked about failures of leadership, about how we see injury and assume incompetence, about how we discard warriors instead of adapting to their capabilities. She looked at the graduates. Every person in this room has lived that experience. You've been told you're broken, that you're done, that your service is over. And here's the truth. Part of you is broken. I'm not going to lie and say injury doesn't matter, that you can just push through and be who you were before. You can't. None of us can. Maya paused, letting that reality settle. But broken doesn't mean useless. Change doesn't mean worthless. Limited doesn't mean incapable. What this program has done, what all of you have done, is prove that warriors can adapt, can find new ways to serve, can contribute meaningfully, even when they're wounded. She gestured to Holt. Sergeant Holt can't clear routes anymore, but she can prevent other EOD techs from making the mistakes that might get them killed. That matters. That saves lives. She nodded to another graduate. Corporal Martinez can't deploy to combat zones because of his PTSD, but he can translate intercepted communications, providing intelligence that protects deployed units. That matters. That wins battles. She continued through the graduates, acknowledging each one's specific contribution, not glossing over their limitations, but showing how capability persisted despite injury. This program exists because the system failed me, Maya said, because I was a high-value asset who got stuck in a supply depot because nobody knew what else to do with me. Admiral Hendricks saw that failure and decided to fix it. You are the result of that decision. She held up a small pin, the silent emblem insignia, a phoenix rising from coordinates and classified markings. This pin represents your service. The phoenix represents transformation, but the coordinates remind us of where we came from. You are all still warriors. You've just evolved into a different form of warrior. Each graduate came forward to receive their pin. Maya shook hands with each one, her left hand tremoring but her grip firm. She saw in their faces the same mixture mixture of pride and pain that she carried, the acknowledgement that they'd lost something irreplaceable but gained something valuable in return. After the ceremony, Holt approached her. "I wanted to thank you," Holt said. "When I showed up here 3 months ago, I was ready to give up. Now I have purpose again." "You always had purpose, Jen. You just needed someone to help you see it." "Still, thank you." Holt hesitated. "I heard you're moving to D.C. Pentagon assignment. Next month, assistant to the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Wounded Warrior Programs. It's a mouthful of a title for a job that's basically turning silent emblem into permanent policy." "That's huge. That's terrifying," Maya corrected. "I'm going to be briefing generals and congresspeople, writing policy that affects thousands of service members, and doing it all while managing a TBI that still kicks my ass on bad days." "You'll be fine. You've proven you can do this." "Some days I have. Some days I can barely remember my own address." Maya smiled slightly. "But that's the point, isn't it? Capability doesn't mean perfection. It means doing what you can, when you can, as well as you can, and having the humility to rest when you need to." Maya's apartment was mostly packed. She'd be leaving for Washington, D.C. in 3 days, starting a new chapter that felt both exciting and overwhelming. Tonight, though, she'd allowed herself a quiet evening to process everything that had happened over the past year. Her phone buzzed. A text from Admiral Hendress. "Congratulations. Pentagon confirmed your position. You start 2 weeks from Monday. Make me proud." Maya typed back, "I'll do my best, ma'am." Another text appeared, this time from Chen. "Replacement arrived today. He seems competent, but he's not you. We're going to miss you at Pendleton." Maya smiled. She'd miss Pendleton too. It was where she'd hit bottom, where she'd been harassed and dismissed and nearly forced out. But it was also where she'd found her new purpose, where she'd helped create something that would outlast her individual contribution. Her doorbell rang. She opened it to find Miller standing on her doorstep in civilian clothes, looking uncomfortable and older than she remembered. "Staff Sergeant Reeves," he said. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to see." "That's true," Maya agreed. She didn't invite him in, didn't offer pleasantries, just waited. "I wanted to apologize, properly. Not the forced apology at my NJP, but a real one." Miller shifted his weight. "I was wrong. About you. About what capability means. About leadership. I saw someone wounded and assumed that made them useless. That was ignorant and cruel." Maya studied him. He'd been busted down to corporal, had served his punishment, and was now working in a different unit. The Marine Corps grapevine said he'd actually become a decent NCO after the incident. Quieter, more thoughtful, less prone to bullying. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I'm getting out. Medical retirement for hip and knee issues. Nothing dramatic, just the accumulated damage of 20 years. And I've been going through the transition process, and it's..." He trailed off. "It's hard, realizing that I don't know who I am without the uniform, that I'm going to have limitations in civilian life, that I need help." He looked at Maya directly. "And I remembered how I treated you when you were going through your transition, how I made it harder instead of supporting you. That's been eating at me. So I wanted to say I'm sorry and thank you for creating a program that's helping people like us, even people who don't deserve your help." Maya considered. She could reject the apology, could send Miller away with the satisfaction of having denied him forgiveness. It would be justified, but it would also be pointless. "Apology accepted, Corporal, and for what it's worth, the program isn't just for the deserving. It's for everyone who served and got wounded in the process. That includes you, if you need it." Miller looked surprised. "I don't think I'd be welcome. The program doesn't work that way. You served. You're wounded. That's enough." Maya paused. "But I'd suggest you start by examining why you reacted to my injury the way you did. Because that kind of prejudice, against visible weakness, against women in combat roles, against complexity in general, that's not something that disappears just because you apologized. You need to understand it before you can change it." "Yeah, I'm working on that. Therapy mostly. Turns out I have a lot of issues with how I was taught leadership." Miller extended his hand. "Good luck in D.C., Staff Sergeant. I hope your program changes things." Maya shook his hand. "It already has, Corporal. One warrior at a time." The flight to Washington, D.C. was turbulent, which matched Maya's emotional state perfectly. She'd taken medication for the motion sickness that her TBI had made worse, and now she sat in her seat trying to focus on the briefing materials for her new position while her vision occasionally blurred and her head throbbed. A bad day. Not terrible, but enough that she had to take frequent breaks, close her eyes, practice breathing exercises. The woman in the seat next to her, a businesswoman in her 50s, watched with concern. "Are you okay? Do you need me to call for help?" "I'm fine. Just managing a medical condition. But thank you." "Migraine? Related to traumatic brain injury. Usually manageable, but flights are challenging." The woman nodded sympathetically. "My son has TBI from a car accident. He's 14. We're still figuring out how to help him adapt." Maya opened her eyes, pushing through the discomfort. "What's he struggling with most?" "Everything, it feels like. His balance is off. He has trouble focusing. He gets frustrated because he can't do things the way he used to. The doctors say he'll adapt," but she trailed off. "He keeps saying he's broken. He's not broken. His brain is healing, and that process is messy and non-linear. Some days will be better than others. Some tasks will be easier than others. But broken implies unfixable, and that's not accurate. Maya pulled out her tablet, ignoring the way the screen brightness made her headache worse. Look, I work for a program that helps wounded warriors adapt to TBI and other injuries. We have resources, strategies, support networks. I can send you information that might help your son. The woman's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. We've been feeling so lost. Maya spent the rest of the flight talking to this mother about TBI, about adaptation strategies, about the importance of celebrating small victories and accepting bad days without shame. It was exhausting. Every word increased her migraine. Every moment of focus cost her something. But it also reminded her why the work mattered, because there were millions of people dealing with TBI, not just military personnel. And most of them didn't have access to the kind of support and resources that Maya had fought to create. When they landed, Maya's headache had escalated to the point where she could barely stand. She made it through baggage claim and into a taxi, gave the driver her hotel address, and then closed her eyes and focused on surviving the ride. This was her reality. She could brief assistant secretaries and design programs and help hundreds of wounded warriors. But she could also be completely disabled by a combination of flight turbulence and screen time. Both were true simultaneously. At the hotel, she checked in, went to her room, took her medication, and lay in darkness for 3 hours until the migraine subsided enough for her to function. Then she opened her laptop and began reviewing the briefing materials for Monday's meeting, because this was also her reality. She could adapt, could function, could contribute meaningfully, even when her body was actively working against her. The next morning, Maya woke early out of habit. She put on her PT gear and went to the hotel gym, where she ran on the treadmill with her modified gait, the one that compensated for her balance issues. Other gym users gave her odd looks. Her running form was visibly asymmetric, favoring her right side. She didn't care. She'd given up caring what people thought about her visible limitations months ago. After her workout, she reviewed her schedule for the coming weeks. It was intense. Meetings with DoD leadership, briefings for congressional staff, coordination sessions with medical personnel from all services, and the beginning of policy development for the expanded Silent Emblem program. Her phone rang. Admiral Hendress, Staff Sergeant, just checking in. You arrive okay? Yes, ma'am. Had a rough flight. TBI and turbulence don't mix well, but I'm functional today. Good. I want to prepare you for what's coming. The Pentagon is going to test you. They're going to question whether someone with your medical limitations should be in this position. They're going to watch for signs of weakness or incompetence, and they're going to be disappointed when they don't find any. What if they do find signs, ma'am? I have bad days. Sometimes I can't hide the limitations. Then you don't hide them, the Admiral said firmly. You acknowledge them, you work around them, and you demonstrate that capability doesn't require perfection. That's the whole point of Silent Emblem, showing that wounded warriors can contribute meaningfully while managing real limitations. You're living proof of that concept. No pressure then. The Admiral laughed. You've handled worse than Pentagon politics, Staff Sergeant. You'll be fine. Maya reported to the Pentagon on Monday morning in her service uniform, ribbons perfectly aligned, shoes polished to a mirror shine. Her left hand tremored as she swiped her new access badge. It was a moderate tremor day, visible but not debilitating. The Office for Wounded Warrior Programs was on the 3rd floor, a suite of rooms that hummed with activity. Maya was introduced to her new team: policy analysts, medical liaisons, congressional affairs specialists, and administrative staff. Most of them were civilians. Several were veterans, though none with visible injuries. Her direct supervisor was Mr. Richard Castellano, a career DoD civilian who'd been managing wounded warrior programs for 15 years. He was in his early 60s, professional and clearly skeptical about having a staff sergeant as his senior military advisor. Staff Sergeant Reeves, he said during their first private meeting, I want to be direct. I didn't request a military advisor for this position. I was told by the Admiral that you were essential to the Silent Emblem expansion, so I need to understand what value you bring that I don't already have from my existing team. Maya appreciated the bluntness. I bring operational experience with both being a wounded warrior and helping other wounded warriors transition. I understand the system from the inside, its failures, its gaps, its unwritten rules. Your team can design excellent policy, but if it doesn't account for the reality of how the military actually functions, it won't be implemented effectively. And your medical limitations? I've read your file, TBI with ongoing symptoms. How do I know you can handle the demands of this position? You don't, sir. Neither do I completely. What I can tell you is that I've been managing these limitations for 18 months while building and running a program that successfully assessed over 130 wounded warriors. I have bad days. On those days, I work from home or I take leave, but I also have good days. And on those days, I'm as capable as anyone in this building. Castellano studied her for a long moment. Fair enough. We'll evaluate based on performance, not on diagnosis, but I expect you to communicate when you're struggling. I can't accommodate limitations I don't know about. Understood, sir. The first first week was overwhelming. Maya attended back-to-back meetings, trying to absorb information about DoD policy processes, congressional budget cycles, interagency coordination, and dozens of other topics that had never been part of her military training. She took extensive notes, asked questions when she was confused, and tried to ignore the way her headaches spiked after each long session in fluorescent-lit conference rooms. On Thursday, she briefed a room full of colonels and generals on the Silent Emblem Project's results. Halfway through her presentation, she lost her place. A cognitive slip, one of those moments where her brain just dropped a thread and she couldn't retrieve it. She paused, took a breath, and said calmly, "I apologize, sirs and ma'ams. I've lost my place. Let me check my notes." It took her 15 seconds to find the thread again and continue. In those 15 seconds, she felt the weight of judgment from the room, the questioning whether she was really fit for this position, whether her injury disqualified her from this level of responsibility. But she also knew that every person in that room had moments of confusion or forgetfulness. The difference was that hers came from documented brain damage rather than simple distraction. Same effect, different cause, same recovery process. She finished the briefing without further incident and received positive feedback. The cognitive slip hadn't derailed anything. It had just been a visible reminder of her limitations. After the briefing, a Marine Corps general approached her, Major General Sandra Ortiz, a career infantry officer with 3 combat deployments. "Staff Sergeant, that was an excellent briefing, and I appreciated your composure when you lost your place. Most people would have panicked or tried to cover it up. You just dealt with it. No point in covering it up, ma'am. It happened. Best approach is to acknowledge it and move on." "That's leadership," General Ortiz said. "Mind if I ask you something personal?" "Go ahead, ma'am." "Do you ever regret not fighting the medical retirement harder? You could have appealed, could have demanded additional evaluation, might have been able to stay in operational roles." Maya considered. "Sometimes, but mostly no. The TBI is real. The limitations are real. I wasn't safe in forward deployment anymore, and pretending otherwise would have put others at risk. What I regret is that the system didn't have a category for wounded but still valuable. That's what I'm trying to create now." General Ortiz nodded. "Good, because we're losing too many warriors like you. Keep fighting for this program, Staff Sergeant. It matters." Chapter 25. Congressional Testimony. 3 months into her Pentagon assignment, Maya was asked to testify before a congressional subcommittee reviewing DoD wounded warrior programs. It would be her first time appearing before Congress, and the stakes were significant. The subcommittee would be deciding whether to fund the Silent Emblem expansion or cut it as an unnecessary expense. Castellano spent hours preparing her. They're going to ask about cost, about effectiveness, about whether this is just feel-good policy that doesn't deliver results. You need to have data ready, but you also need to tell stories. Congress responds to human impact, not just statistics. Maya worked with the team to develop a presentation that balanced both: hard numbers on successful transitions, cost savings from retained personnel, and improved unit readiness, combined with specific stories of wounded warriors who'd found new purpose through the program. The night before the testimony, Maya barely slept, partly from nervousness, partly from a migraine that refused to fully subside. At 400, she gave up on sleep, took her medication, and went to the hotel gym to run. Physical activity sometimes helped with the migraines, sometimes made them worse. Today, it helped marginally. She arrived at the Congressional Office building at 8:30, dressed in her service uniform with all her ribbons. The tremor in her left hand was pronounced. Stress always made it worse, but she'd learned to work with it. The hearing room was intimidating. High ceilings, formal seating, cameras recording everything. Maya sat at the witness table next to Castellano and Admiral Hendricks, who'd flown in specifically for this testimony. Chairman Dawson, a congressman from Texas, opened the hearing. "We're here today to review the Silent Emblem project and determine whether it justifies continued funding. Staff Sergeant Reeves, you're the senior military advisor for this program. Tell us why we should spend taxpayer money on this initiative." Maya took a breath and began. She walked through the data. 347 wounded warriors assessed, 271 successfully transitioned to new roles, 52 assisted with medical retirement, 24 still in evaluation. She explained the cost analysis. Retaining trained personnel was significantly cheaper than recruiting and training replacements. Then she moved to the human impact. "Mr. Chairman, I'd like to tell you about Sergeant Jennifer Holt. She was an EOD technician who sustained severe PTSD after an IED attack. The standard medical retirement process would have discharged her with a disability rating and sent her home. Instead, Silent Emblem assessed her complete capabilities and found that while she couldn't clear routes anymore, she could teach others how to do it safely. Today, Sergeant Holt is developing EOD training curriculum that's already reduced training injuries by 31%. She continued with other examples. The intelligence analyst with PTSD who couldn't deploy but provided critical translation services news, the pilot with vision impairment who became an expert instructor, the combat medic who couldn't serve in the field but revolutionized trauma training. These warriors didn't lose their value when they got injured, Maya said. They changed, and our system needs to change with them, needs to recognize that capability exists on a spectrum, needs to build pathways for wounded warriors to continue contributing. Congresswoman Martinez from California spoke up. Staff Sergeant, I notice you have a tremor in your left hand. Is that related to your own combat injury? Maya had been expecting this question. Yes, ma'am. I have TBI from an IED blast in Afghanistan. The tremor is permanent, along with balance issues and ongoing migraines. And yet you're here, in a demanding Pentagon position, helping run a major DoD program. How is that possible if your injury is so severe? Because capability and limitation coexist, ma'am. I have real limitations. There are days when I can barely function due to migraines, times when I lose track of conversations, moments like the one you just witnessed where my hand tremors significantly. But I also have real capabilities, tactical knowledge, operational experience, and the personal understanding of what wounded warriors face. The Silent Emblem program exists to recognize that both can be true simultaneously. Congressman Bradley from Ohio, known for his skepticism of military programs, leaned forward. Let me play devil's advocate, Staff Sergeant. Isn't this program just an expensive way to avoid making hard decisions? Sometimes people are injured beyond their ability to serve. Isn't it kinder to let them go rather than trying to force square pegs into round holes? Sir, I'd agree if we were forcing anything. We're not. We're offering assessment and opportunity. Some wounded warriors go through our evaluation and choose medical retirement. That's fine. Others discover they have capabilities they didn't know remained. The difference is that we're giving them the choice based on actual functional capability rather than blanket medical diagnosis. But at what cost? $200 million is a lot of money. Compared to the cost of recruiting, training, and developing 271 replacement service members, it's remarkably efficient, sir. We're not creating new capabilities. We're recognizing existing ones that the previous system missed. The questioning continued for 90 minutes. Maya answered each question directly, sometimes referring to data, sometimes to personal experience, always maintaining composure even when her tremor made holding her notes difficult. At the end, Chairman Dawson said, Staff Sergeant, I want to thank you for your service and for this testimony. This committee will be reviewing all the information provided and will make our funding recommendation within 30 days. Maya saluted. Thank you, sir. Outside the hearing room, Admiral Hendress pulled Maya aside. You did well. Very well. Martinez's question about your tremor could have derailed things, but you turned it into a demonstration of the program's principles. I just told the truth, ma'am, which is exactly why you're the right person for this job. The Admiral paused. The funding will probably be approved. Bradley's opposition was expected, but most of the committee seems supportive. This program is going to become permanent. Maya felt the weight of that realization. Permanent, institutional, something that would outlast her, that would help thousands of wounded warriors for years to come. Then we need to make sure it's built correctly, ma'am, because if we get this wrong, it won't just fail. It'll make things worse for the next generation. Agreed. Which is why you're going to be busy for the next several years building it right. Tucker. Epilogue. 3 years later, Maya stood in her office at the Pentagon, reviewing the quarterly report for what was now officially called the Silent Emblem Transition Program. The numbers were impressive. Over 2,400 wounded warriors assessed across all services. 1,947 successfully transitioned to new military roles. 412 assisted with dignified medical retirement and civilian career placement. 141 still in evaluation. But Maya had learned that numbers only told part of the story. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sergeant Jennifer Holt, who was now a gunnery sergeant and the senior EOD training advisor at Quantico. New curriculum reduced training accidents by 47% this year. Lives saved because you gave me a second chance. Maya smiled, then winced as a familiar spike of pain hit behind her right eye. Migraine incoming. She recognized the signs, the visual aura, the sensitivity to light, the way sounds suddenly felt too loud. She'd learned to plan for this. She texted her assistant, migraine starting, working from home this afternoon. All meetings after 1400 need to be rescheduled. 3 years ago, she would have tried to push through, would have seen the migraine as a failure or weakness. Now she understood it as simply a limitation that required management, no different than needing glasses or taking blood pressure medication. She gathered her materials, dimmed her computer screen, and headed home. The Pentagon had been her professional home for 3 years now, long enough that people had stopped questioning her presence, stopped watching for signs that her TBI made her incompetent. She'd proven herself through consistent performance, through hundreds of successful briefings and policy implementations. But she'd also proven herself through consistent acknowledgement of limitation. She took sick leave when needed. She worked from home on bad migraine days. She delegated tasks when her her cognitive load became overwhelming. And rather than seeing this as weakness, her colleagues had come to see it as a form of leadership, modeling how to function effectively while managing chronic conditions. At home, Maya took her medication, closed the blackout curtains, and lay down in the darkness. The migraine would probably last 3 to 4 hours. She'd be functional again by evening, could catch up on emails then. As she waited for the medication to take effect, her mind drifted to the journey that had brought her here. 4 years ago, she'd been in a supply depot at Camp Pendleton, being harassed by a sergeant who saw her injury as evidence of worthlessness. Now she was a key architect of DoD policy, had testified before Congress multiple times, and had helped create a program that was genuinely changing how the military treated wounded warriors. The cost had been significant. The work was relentless, the pressure constant, the scrutiny never-ending. She'd had to fight for every policy change, had to prove the program's value repeatedly, had to justify her own presence in rooms full of people who questioned whether someone with her limitations belonged there. But the mission had been worth it. Her phone buzzed again. She squinted at the screen through the migraine haze. A message from Admiral Hendress. DoD just approved silent emblem expansion to reserve components. Your proposal was accepted in full. Well done. Maya managed a small smile despite the pain. The reserve components, National Guard and Reserve Forces, had been the final frontier. They had even fewer resources for wounded warrior support than active duty, and getting the program extended to them had required 2 years of advocacy. She typed back slowly, her tremoring hand making it difficult. Thank you, ma'am. Team effort. The Admiral's response came quickly. You built this, Maya. Own it. Maya set down the phone and closed her eyes. The migraine was peaking, making thought difficult, but beneath the pain, she felt something that had been absent for years after her injury. Pride. Not pride in being superhuman or in transcending her limitations. Pride in being effectively human, in acknowledging what she could and couldn't do, in building systems that worked with reality rather than against it, in proving that wounded warriors could contribute meaningfully while managing real limitations. 4 hours later, the migraine subsided around 1800 as predicted. Maya emerged from her bedroom, still feeling fragile but functional. She made simple dinner, eggs and toast, nothing that required complex cooking, and settled at her home desk to catch up on emails. Most were routine, coordination requests, policy questions, meeting confirmations, but one stood out. It was from a Marine corporal she didn't know, stationed at Camp Lejeune. Staff Sergeant Reeves, you don't know me, but I wanted to reach out. I'm a combat engineer who sustained TBI in a training accident 6 months ago. The doctors told me I was done, that I should accept medical retirement and move on. I was ready to give up. Then my command sent me to the Silent Emblem Assessment Center at Lejeune. They evaluated me for 2 weeks, found that while I can't do demolitions work anymore, the concussive impacts would risk further injury. I can teach combat engineering theory and design training exercises. They're reassigning me to the schoolhouse at Lejeune. I have a job. I have a purpose. I'm still a Marine. I know you created this program. I know you fight for people like me every day in D.C. I wanted you to know that it matters. You saved my career. You probably saved my life, because I was in a dark place before the assessment. Thank you. Semper Fi, CPL. Marcus Reed. Maya read the email 3 times, feeling emotion tighten her throat. This was why the work mattered, not the policy victories or the budget approvals or the Pentagon briefings. This, one Marine who'd been ready to give up, who now had hope and purpose. She replied, Corporal Reed, thank you for sharing your story. I'm glad the program helped you find your path forward, but remember, you did the hard work. You went through the assessment. You accepted that your role would change. You adapted. That took courage. The program just gave you the opportunity. You made it work. Keep serving, Marine. We need you. Sergeant Maya Reeves. She sent the email, then sat back and looked around her apartment. It was modest, decorated with a few Marine Corps mementos and photos from her operational days. On her desk sat the Phoenix variant tattoo design in a small frame, the classified operational identifier that had once been hidden on her ribs, now a reminder of who she'd been. But next to it sat something new, a framed photo from the first Silent Emblem cohort graduation. 14 wounded warriors standing together, each wearing the small Phoenix pin that marked their transformation. That was who she was now. Not the operator she'd been, not the supply clerk she'd been relegated to, but something new. An advocate, a policy architect, a leader who'd turned her own struggle into systemic change. The tremor in her left hand was pronounced tonight. Stress and migraine after effects made it worse, but as she reached for her coffee cup, she no longer saw the tremor as a mark of failure. It was simply evidence. Evidence that she'd survived. Evidence that she'd adapted. Evidence that capability and limitation could coexist. 6 months later, full circle, Maya returned to Camp Pendleton for the first time in 3 years. The Silent Emblem Assessment Center there had grown significantly. What had started as a small pilot program now occupied an entire building with dedicated staff, medical facilities, and training spaces faces. She was there to speak at a ceremony honoring Admiral Hendris, who was retiring after 35 years of service. The Admiral had been the driving force behind Silent Emblem's creation and expansion, had fought for it in Pentagon offices and congressional hearing rooms, had protected it from budget cuts and bureaucratic resistance. The ceremony was at the base theater, packed with Marines, sailors, and civilian personnel. Maya sat on the stage with other speakers, watching as the Admiral was presented with various awards and commendations. When it was Maya's turn to speak, she approached the podium with her usual slight imbalance, her left hand tremoring as she gripped her notes. "Admiral Hendris," Maya began, "we first met 4 years ago during an inspection of this very base. You recognized something in me that the system had missed. Not that I was special, but that I represented a systemic failure. One wounded warrior, misunderstood and underutilized, stuck in a supply depot because nobody knew what else to do." She paused, making eye contact with the Admiral. "You could have written a report, made a recommendation, and moved on. Instead, you fought. You demanded access to my complete service record. You confronted a sergeant who was harassing me. You challenged a command climate that saw injury as incompetence. And then, most importantly, you asked what came next." Maya gestured to the audience. "Silent Emblem exists because you didn't stop at individual justice. You saw systemic failure and insisted on systemic change. Today, this program operates at 43 installations across all services. We've assessed over 3,000 wounded warriors. We've saved the DoD an estimated $2.7 billion in recruitment and training costs. But more than that, we've given warriors purpose, dignity, and hope." Her voice strengthened. "I'm not going to stand here and say that every wounded warrior can continue serving. Some injuries are too severe. Some warriors need to transition out, and that's okay. What Silent Emblem does is ensure that we make those decisions based on actual capability rather than assumptions, that we give every warrior the chance to prove what they can still do, and that we support them regardless of whether they stay or go." Maya looked directly at the Admiral. "You taught me that leadership means seeing what others miss, fighting for what others dismiss, and building systems that outlast individual careers. Silent Emblem is your legacy, ma'am, but it's also your challenge to all of us, to keep fighting, keep improving, keep recognizing that our warriors deserve better than binary judgments of fit or unfit." The audience applauded. Admiral Hendris stood and embraced Maya, whispering, "You've exceeded every expectation I had. Thank you for carrying this forward." After the ceremony, Maya walked through the base, eventually finding herself at the supply depot where her journey had begun. It looked the same warehouse, same metal shelving, same industrial lighting. Chen was still there, now a sergeant himself. He greeted Maya with a huge grin. "Look at you, Pentagon big shot. Staff Sergeant Reeves, senior military advisor, policy architect, congressional witness. We've all been following your career. How's the supply depot? Running smoothly? Your systems are still in place. Your replacement kept everything you built." Chen's expression turned serious. "You know Miller came by last year?" Maya was surprised. "Miller? What did he want?" "He's out now. Medical retirement. Came by to tell me he'd been through the Silent Emblem assessment process at his last duty station. Said it helped him transition to civilian life with some dignity." Chen paused. "He also said he wished he'd understood what you were going through when you were here. Said he'd been an asshole, and the program you built was better than he deserved." Maya processed that. "Did he seem okay? Older, humbler, dealing with his own limitations now and apparently learning empathy the hard way?" Chen smiled slightly. "Karma's funny like that." They walked through the warehouse together, Chen pointing out small changes and improvements. Maya felt a strange sense of closure. This place had been her bottom, the point where she'd almost given up, but it had also been the beginning of her transformation. "You know what I remember most?" Chen said. "That day Admiral Hendris revealed who you really were. The look on everyone's faces. The realization that we'd all underestimated you, that we'd been watching a decorated special operations veteran and seeing only a broken supply clerk. That's the point of Silent Emblem," Maya said. "Teaching people to look deeper, to recognize that injury doesn't erase capability, to build systems that account for complexity instead of demanding simplicity. You did that. You actually changed the system. A little bit. There's still a long way to go." They reached Maya's old office, now occupied by someone else, but still recognizable. She stood in the doorway, remembering the long nights documenting Miller's harassment, the hours spent proving her competence, the daily struggle to maintain dignity while being systematically dismissed. It had been hard. It had been painful. But it had also forged her into someone capable of the work she did now, someone who understood institutional failure intimately and could fight to change it. "Thanks for the tour, Chen. It's good to see this place again. Come back anytime. You're a legend here now." "The supply clerk who changed the Marine Corps," Maya laughed. "I didn't change the Marine Corps. I just convinced them to look at wounded warriors differently." "Same thing," Chen said with a grin. Final reflection. That evening, Maya sat in her hotel room room overlooking the Pacific Ocean, the same view she'd had from her apartment during her time at Pendleton. She was exhausted. The day had been physically and emotionally demanding, and she could feel a migraine building at the edges of her awareness. But she was also content. Her phone showed messages from various people. Sergeant Holt reporting on a successful training evolution. Corporal Reed asking for advice on a career decision. Dr. Chen inviting her to speak at a medical conference on TBI and military service. Dozens of others from wounded warriors she'd helped, colleagues she'd worked with, commanders she'd briefed. The Silent Emblem program had grown beyond anything she'd imagined that first day when Admiral Hendress had offered her the choice between staying in the supply depot or taking a risk on something new. She'd taken the risk. She'd fought through bad days and worse days, through migraines that disabled her and cognitive slips that embarrassed her, through countless moments where her limitations were on full display for people who questioned her capability. And she'd proven, not that she was superhuman, but that she was effectively human, that limitations and capability could coexist, that wounded warriors could continue to serve meaningfully if given proper support and opportunity, that the system could change if someone fought hard enough for long enough. Her left hand tremored as she typed a final email for the day, a message to her team in D.C. Silent Emblem has helped 3,247 wounded warriors over the past 4 years, but I'm most proud of the ones we haven't helped yet, the thousands who will go through this program in the years to come, who will be assessed fairly, who will be given real choices, who will know that their service and their capability matter even when they're wounded. This is what we built. This is what we fought for. This is what we'll protect. Keep fighting. Maya. She sent the message, closed her laptop, and walked to the window. The Pacific stretched endlessly, dark water meeting darker sky. Somewhere out there, Marines were on deployment, were in combat, were facing the same dangers she'd once faced. Some of them would be wounded. Some would face injuries that would change them fundamentally. And when they came home, when they began the difficult process of figuring out who they were now and what they could still do, they'd have Silent Emblem. They'd have assessment that looked at capability, not just diagnosis. They'd have leaders trained to recognize adaptation rather than demanding perfection. They'd have pathways forward that acknowledged both their limitations and their remaining strengths. It wouldn't be easy. Recovery never was, but it would be possible, and possibility was everything. Maya touched her left hand to her chest, feeling the faint outline of the Phoenix tattoo beneath her shirt. The coordinates embedded in its wings represented operations that would remain classified forever, sacrifices that would never be publicly acknowledged, warriors whose stories would stay silent. But the program that bore its name, Silent Emblem, would speak for them, would ensure that wounded warriors were seen, valued, and supported, would prove that even when you couldn't go back to who you were, you could still move forward into who you needed to be. The tremor in her hand was steady, rhythmic, permanent, evidence of damage, evidence of survival, evidence of transformation. She was Staff Sergeant Maya Reeves, wounded warrior, policy architect, and proof that broken didn't mean worthless, just different, adapted, evolved, and that was enough.